And in the words of Romelu Lukaku, history repeats itself. Been through it in 2019 and 2023 again. I hope the league really takes action this time for real, because this beautiful game should be enjoyed by everyone. Fuck racism. We're with you, Rom. Welcome to the Anglo-Italian podcast. My name is Adam, and this week is a solo edition. No Rory this week, but normal service resumes next Thursday, so keep an eye on our socials. But this week, we are going to be joined by a guest. He will give us a flavour of Serie A, as well as discuss his beloved Lazio, the Coppa Italia, and also the weekend fixtures. So let's get into it and let's preview Serie A.
My name is Massimo Morales, and you are listening to Anglo-Italian podcast.
Ciao and come estas. We are in the Serie A section, and I am delighted to say that I am joined by an incredible guest. I'm joined by football commentator Federico Farco. So, Federico, nice for you to join us on the Anglo-Italian podcast. How are you doing this evening?
Hi, Adam. Thanks for the incredible. Fine, thank you. Hope you are as well. So let's crack on.
Yeah, definitely. And we brought you on especially to talk about Bianco Celesti, your famous Lazio side. That's I think it's fair to say you've been quite impressed by how they've been performing this season. Before we start, I suppose, how have you taken on like this kind of second season with Sari at the moment?
Yeah, I think he's done quite okay. I should say really well, but the problem is, see, I've got this 98-99 shirt,
I can
which is
see.
my favorite season ever, and that's not the Scudetto one. It's the one we win the Cup Winners' Cup, and Lazio lose the league on the very last day of the season. Still, I'm convinced, that season was Lazio's best in history for multiple reasons. And that's because they won in Europe. I've got such a fondness for Europe, but then the club doesn't really think likewise. So I feel like detached from that perspective. Although I understand, we don't have like a full squad, which is probably able to be competitive on all three competitions, which is a proper shame, especially after Roma winning the Conference League last season. Although I don't really value the competition so much,
Yeah.
but at the same time, we always boasted we had won something in Europe. They hadn't. So last season, changed the perspective a bit, and I just wanted Lazio to do well again in Europe this season, and it didn't look like a mission impossible because they had a, I wouldn't say an easy group, but then a doable group with Feyenoord, Midtjylland, and Sturm Graz, and then they all level on points for the first time in history, all on level on 8 points, and then they don't go through for a miserable game in Rotterdam, but also for miserable games against Sturm Graz. I think, especially the one in Austria, also the one in Rome, but the one in Rome they were like reduced to 10 men, so it was a bit strange. And then obviously, you would expect them to go through in the Conference League, but they struggled with Cluj and then left the competition sadly with AZ Alkmaar. And I think it was a shame, to be honest. But I don't think Sarri really values Europe. Although you would think he won it with Chelsea, won Europa League with Chelsea, beating Arsenal. Obviously, it was a completely different side, definitely the strongest side. But at the same time, you will think, okay, I can give him a chance. But then obviously all the efforts went into the league. I can't really blame them for that somehow. So they did well, apart from a few stupid games, I would say, like losing in Lecce or beating Empoli 2-0 and then drawing 2-2 in the last 6-7 minutes, which was bad. Or obviously, when they lost at home against Atalanta was a bit surprising, I must say, because Atalanta really played well in that game. And in the reverse fixture, actually, Lazio played probably the best game of the season, winning in Bergamo. So it was a bit weird. But then, they're really improved in terms of, clean sheets now with 6 consecutive clean sheets. As Ollie Eriksson has done better with 7 at the end of the 90s. So there are many, many, many positives. And also you can see obviously the defense is tidier at the back. All credit due to Romagnoli and Casale forming a good partnership in the back, which is something we had really lacked for a while. Playing the back four, strong partnership was something we really didn't have. Especially last season, it was zonal defending, but then they were never moving forward. So we conceded a lot from long shots or outside the area or whatever, because there was never enough how do you say, understanding between the central defenders to say, all right, I will cover that, but you go and cover a bit the shot or whatever. They probably didn't have that kind of understanding, which you can see it's really visible. It has improved. So as we were chatting before going live about Milinkovic-Savic, which is probably going to leave at the end of this season, because otherwise he won't extend the contract, and then 2024 he will go for zero. So they definitely need to sell him now, because otherwise it will be such a shame. So I think he will leave. I don't know where. If you ask me, I personally know he would have wanted to go abroad, but then I don't know which club really will go and get the cash out for his performances. Even when I was at the pre-season up in the mountains, and it was so close, and you could see he's a completely different size of player. He's so big, and he's so skilled, and he makes the difference. But at the same time, what me as a Lazio fan, what I didn't like sometimes from Milinkovic-Savic was like his attitude, because sometimes it was like, all right, this is an easy game, I don't care, But for instance, last weekend in Monza, I saw there was a shift. Mentally, it was like, okay, solid performance. It was like he went from minus to plus during the game. It was like going up and up. His performance was rising. And it's something, I wasn't really used to see, because sometimes he tended to underestimate, opponents or games, but he was really in the game. So I think he's aware this part of the season is very important for him and for Lazio, of course, but also for him, and to show up on the scene, on the big scene. He probably knows these last 10, 11 games will be key for his future, really, not just for Lazio's season, but for his career.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I reflect on Sarri so far, I think this second season, even though at the beginning of the season I didn't anticipate Lazio to finish as high as they have been right now. I mean, I appreciate the season isn't finished yet, but they are in a very promising position right now. But the one thing that really sticks out is how clever he's been in the transfer market. So as you allude to, obviously Romagnoli, even from Milan, has been a really fantastic signing, to be fair. But even Provedel, who they brought in from Spezia, has been really solid as a goalkeeper. Because if I remember last season, even Stojosa, he wasn't the most solid. There was a few games where he'd let the ball slip quite easily, for example, or not save those opportunities. So it feels like he's got even players like the likes of Pedro, who he brought in on a free transfer from Roma, which is mad when you think about it now, but brought him in. He knew him from his days at Chelsea, and he's just given him the full reins to kind of be that key player for him. And he's really rewarded him because of the performances that he's getting out of Pedro. So I was going to ask you, I mean, do you feel like this season has been different to last season, where he was still learning, I suppose, about his squad?
Yeah, for sure. It's been different under many points of view. I would say, first and foremost, I was mentioning the clean sheets, and that's that was very important to improve, and also mentally, I can see the team has improved as well. You were mentioning in the transfer market as well. Sarri likes to have his Italian players, and if they're Lazio fans, even better, which is something we really appreciate from him in terms of strategy. Obviously, because he knows if he brings in some players who actually were Lazio supporters when they were kids, so we will feel kind of easier to convey his message or to see passion on the pitch, which is what we really want to see as well. So that's something we really liked as well. But yeah, last season has been crazy as well, because they were going from stupid games like 4-4 against Udinese at home, conceding in stoppage time in like 8 minutes of stoppage time, to, I don't know, big performance at Juventus at the end of the season.
Inter Milan as well at home, 3-1. That was a big
Yeah,
result at the beginning.
the Inter game, obviously, yeah. So there were many ups and downs, and then obviously, yeah, winning the derby, but then losing 3-0 in the reverse fixture was very painful, of course. So I see, I think they understood better the environment. They understood better the value of the games. Obviously, at some point they were really flying. I think in October, when they were like winning 4-0 against Cremonese, 4-0 against Fiorentina. They were doing really well, and you would sense, okay, this is a fantastic season, let's move on. But then it didn't really materialize as probably you were expecting in that moment. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, at the moment, so far so good. They won in Naples, which is a fantastic result. Obviously, Napoli has been doing so well that nobody really can catch them out. But at the same time, if you take Napoli out of the equation, then obviously Lazio and Juve, I would say, so far have probably done better than the rest in terms of consistency, let's say, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is we haven't even mentioned Ciro Immobile, who has been your Provistal, I suppose, really provincial striker that's been kind of giving you all the goals. But this season, it's been less reliant on him this part of the season anyway, certainly. Where do you see the future of Ciro going forward? Because it feels like, this Lazio squad can cope without him. He obviously adds some value because he does score goals. But every time I see him, I kind of question myself, what value does he actually add sometimes? Because it feels like he's one-dimensional with his kind of game. Obviously, you've seen a lot more of Ciro. What do you make of him?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, until Inzaghi was the coach, obviously, I don't know, he's probably slightly younger as well, but the team really was, doing all the extra effort to do well for Ciro. I think, since Sarri stepped in, things have changed somehow because of the movements on the pitch and what he wants him to do, and the movements and everything else. And then obviously this injury didn't really help him to. I think he never really recovered from this injury, to be honest, because he keeps sitting out of games and stuff like that. So obviously fans will always love him. If he wants to end up his career at Lazio, we'll be happy with it. But obviously at the same time, as Di Canio was talking at the beginning of the week, you probably read the quote. It was like saying, yeah, the team from my local bar, well, which will be probably the equivalent of local pub, we have like 3 strikers. Yeah. Lazio only have 1. And which is true, really. So he was giving credit to the coach, because was saying, yeah, they really didn't have like 2 or 3 strikers all season long, and he made things work with just 1 proper striker, which is mad if you think about it. And obviously, yeah, Cancellieri should have stepped up, but he never really stepped up for Ciro, let's say, and probably that's not even his proper position, natural position. So I've heard Lazio kind of refuse to have Joe Simeone on loan. If it's true, that will be really mad, because then Napoli had 3 proper centre forwards in the squad throughout the whole season, which is the kind of player Spalletti really loves to have in his team, and Lazio really didn't have even one. So it's obviously it's because they don't play in the same way. It's different. I understand that, but I would love to have another striker next season. Really needed, because as you say, future without Ciro. Maybe this season it doesn't look bleak, but at the same time, you definitely need someone to step in and change a bit. I don't know, because maybe you don't really need that kind of striker anymore. You need someone else. It was like when Candreva left in 2016 and went to Inter. You would think, okay, we can't replace him, and then they got Luis Alberto And then people were thinking, right, who is this guy? You know, it's not Candreva. But then they actually got another kind of play. You know, he's a completely different kind of play. It was not like coming in for Candreva. It was like someone else. So you need to adapt to the transfer market opportunities. I think, especially if you're Lazio, and but I think Sarri has got clear ideas. So we'll see what the future has in store, because that will depend as well what Sarri is going to do. Does he stay? Does he leave? What is going to happen next? And then obviously Sarri as well. He asked Lotito to have a team manager in order to mediate between him and the club, which will be fantastic. Like when Peruzzi was at the club, he was doing that job, like club manager. So it was like person in between the club and the team, which is, I think, is very important at Lazio, especially. So we would see. I think those additions will be key, both on the pitch and off the pitch. We need to see what was really going to happen next first, before finding kind of replacement for Ciro, let's say.
Yeah, and this was one of the questions I was going to give you as part of the Lotito aspect, but I suppose I'll bring it in now because Matteo Retegui has been linked with Lazio. It's an interesting player because obviously prior to his call up to Italy, no one had heard of him, and now suddenly it feels like a lot of clubs have now noticed him because he scored a few goals for the Italy national side. I do feel sorry for Zaccagni when he never got that call up, but Mancini gave his reasons supposedly. But what do you think of that link? Do you think that would be someone that Lazio could really get behind? Because I always question myself when these links happen. Literally, do Italian clubs have the funds to fund these kind of moves? But this is the big question with Lotito. He obviously has his eye on Champions League football, and potentially he's going to have to back Sarri because you can't expect the whole squad to last in the Champions League as well. So he's got to put his hands in his pocket and give some money, right? What do you think of that one?
Okay, too many
questions, right?
Too many issues now, because I don't know where to start. But obviously, okay, if I think Lazio definitely need to play more regularly Champions League football first and foremost, because I was talking to other friends recently and was like, okay, we need like big famous European nights, because we don't really have them. Even if we reach the UEFA Cup final, World Cup Winners' Cup, beat Manchester United in the Super Cup, but then our only famous night in Europe is winning at Chelsea, Stamford Bridge, 23 years ago. If I compare that, and I have to compare that to Roma. If I compare that to Roma beat Barcelona twice, 3-0 at home in 20 years, and we really never faced Barcelona. We just faced Real Madrid, and we really never really beat them, because it was like 2 draws at home, 2-2 twice, and then we lost in Madrid. And actually Roma won in Madrid. Then obviously the other side of me says, all right, they go in Europe and then they lose 7-1 at Old Trafford, they lose 6-1 in Barcelona, they lose 7-1 against Bayern Munich. So why do you actually go to Europe? But the point is, you have to take into consideration, you might face the big guns, and you're not really equipped to do it, but you need to go there and learn and put yourself on a big stage and kind of get some publicity out there, because otherwise, if you're scared to move forward, then you will never move forward. You will never do any extra step. You need to do that. But even if I compare that to, let's say, Fiorentina, they kind of have modern special nights compared to Lazio. Then, well, they haven't won a trophy in 22 years, so maybe this year they're probably making up for that. But if you think, when they beat Arsenal at Wembley, or when they beat Manchester United at home in Florence, so when they were in the Champions League, they had good nights. We had good nights, but at the same time, probably because Lazio at that moment were like top team in Europe. I think so. At least are in top 4, top 5. So whoever you were facing was still below your level. Whereas it's not the case nowadays. So okay, I was mentioning this to say we need famous European nights, and then they only play Champions League football, okay, in two seasons, which is 2007, 2008, and then after the COVID, 2020, 2021, and then in both occasions, they never really splash the cash. You know, even if Lotito knew what was coming, but then he was not really opening up his wallet. Things have changed since then. Let's say, you know, they have. I would lie if I would say, you know, they haven't changed. But at the same time, you know, if I see last summer, I think he spent wisely. Good players there was like a major overhaul in the squad.
Yeah.
So I don't see this happening this summer. To be honest, they need to be even shrewder, let's say, in the transfer market.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah, they need to spend, but I don't expect him to really splash the cash. So he will have like probably, you know, a limit at some point. And then we will see. And as you say, it's not just Lazio's problem. It's probably tend to be Italian football problem at the minute.
Yeah.
Well, at the minute, it's been for a few years now.
It's been for decades, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we need to, you know, coexist with that and be wiser on the transfer market as well, which I think Lazio's been doing. So they need to carry on with that. But I wouldn't expect them to overspend, let's say.
Definitely. I think he's going to be quite shrewd again. I think he's going to be just given a pot of money. It won't be huge amounts, and he'll have to wheel and deal.
Then it depends as well on Milinkovic, you know, because if he leaves.
Yeah, true.
For how much? Maybe 45, maybe 50 million euros? I don't know. And then what do you do with that money? Do you actually reinvest it? He doesn't have that kind of history to reinvest directly, to be honest. So
it's not like when he was at Chelsea where he had lots of money to spend, right? This is the problem. I do wonder with Sergej Milinkovic-Savic because he's always been linked with moves to Man United in the past. I mean, it was rumoured that in January he might be going to Juventus, which obviously, it transpired they didn't have really any money anyway. So that's probably a blessing for Lazio fans anyway in general. But yeah, I suppose, what's your views on Italy and the way obviously the league are dealing with the situation? Because, what's quite funny is they're trying to cut down on the amount of illegal streams right now. That's their way of protecting the rights of the leagues. But it doesn't feel like they're addressing the real core issues, which is, you know, the infrastructure that clubs, you know, can't build stadiums, right? For example, they're not selling the rights properly when they're selling the TV rights. I mean, when I was looking at comparison, I think, you know, apart from maybe the Bundesliga that undersells themselves versus the Serie A league, and you think how competitive the league has been over the last 2 to 3 seasons, like, you know, Serie A has been goal crazy. You wouldn't normally associate Italian football with being lots of goals, but for once it's been really exciting. And you feel like with the right people, you could get some solid investment into the league. But yeah, is there something rotten in the core, do you think, for yourself? Or do you think we're just underselling what Italian football is, right?
Okay, this is probably too long to answer, I would say, because there are so many issues, and even if, you know, we don't have enough time, I think
probably not. No,
but I think you touched almost every single issue, to be honest. I don't know if we probably need some kind of complete restructuring of the league system as it is in terms of, you know, what Serie A is. You know, probably you need to do something completely different, like, I don't know, MLS or or something else, because, you know, it will be the only way to think collectively and move in the same direction, because otherwise everybody will be rowing in a different direction because of their own interests. But then again, this is Italy, you know, and it's, you know, the football is like a reflection of what the country is. So if you can you actually change the country without changing the football, or vice versa? I'm not sure, to be honest, you know, and it's a bit complex. So yeah, I mean, infrastructure, for instance, is a major issue, and you know, everybody will need to do more. But then, you know, something always happens that prevent things from happening. You know, you will think about Juve, but then if you think what happened when Juve built their own ground, and the scandal which, you know, was happening beforehand, it was a bit crazy as well at the time. But then obviously you think of Sassuolo, but then they got, you know, they bought stadium in another town, in another city, which, you know, been built by Reggiana, but then they bought it in Reggio Emilia, which was wrong with that. And obviously, the good thing is, Udinese is obviously a good example. Atalanta is a good example as well in terms, how the the new ground, how it looks like. It looks like a proper, a proper football ground, which is really well done on them. Then people keep criticizing the San Siro, which I love, but I understand. I realize, I can see it in the background of the picture, but other people say, it's too old, it's decrepit, it needs to go down and do something else. So there's always debate about the issue as well. So it's really tough to find a solution.
I think the problem is you kind of have those Italian infrastructure issues, which is obviously the city's not allowing for these developments to take place. But ultimately, for clubs like your Lazios, etc., to survive in the climate that is European football, they have to aspire to be like your Premier League and Spanish counterparts, where they are offering a lot more to that game experience, right? So, there's so many things, like you allude to. We could do a whole pod on it, to be fair, and I'm sure we'll invite you next time to do this. But yeah, it feels like, for me anyway, certainly you almost want an infrastructure that starts at your Serie B, Serie C level, where it encourages that youth development. But the biggest thing that I see when I go into Italy, just the pitches, just to get some decent pitches, for locals to actually play and encourage youth to actually enjoy football, because it feels like at that level, that's where I suppose you're seeing comments like Mancini and Sarri refer to the likes of having more Italian homegrown players. But then there is an element of they need to be allowed the opportunity to play football as well, because that's the other ultimate thing. Is it seems to be a little bit reliant on certain clubs or certain coaches to do that. And, there's only so much that we can have the likes of Zemin still doing it at Pescara, for example, and encouraging great football, right? We need a lot more to develop as part of a bigger core, bigger strategy.
But then again, provocative question for you. Because, then last season ends with Mourinho winning the conference in that way,
Yeah, sure.
You probably watched the game, and it was like Feyenoord most of the game. They hit the post, hit the crossbar, whatever. But then Roma were very solid in defense, let's say, very good goalkeeping, and they still have a very strong defense. I think you're probably one of the best in the league. And then they win, they win the competition, after 14 years without a trophy, then they win in that way. Real Madrid win the Champions League in the final, playing in the way we witnessed. So, I was going mad because, we were like used to say, right, that's not the way to play football. And then they play that way and they win the trophies. And then you say, okay, sit back, relax. What's happening now? Is that the answer then?
Yeah.
Because, probably Serie A, does Serie A have the quality players to express that kind of football, that level of football? They showed they can, but they don't really have probably the quality players, the top players to improve on that level, I would say. So it's a bit of a problem.
My approach is there's no wrong way to play football. There is definitely the Mourinho style. You can have the Sarri style, right? For example, and I suppose your point is nicely too. Even the Italian national team that won the Euros, they've on that final. It probably wasn't the best, but neither was England's after they scored that first goal. But for me, like, I was screaming at Mancini why he wasn't like putting some forwards on, for example, and he was riding it on and he was holding on, and I was just like, okay, you got England's fastest players against the likes of Chiellini, Bonucci. I was just expecting someone to get sent off here. But yet, like to your point, they were so strong. They had the dark arts, if you want to call it that. Yeah. They were just experienced. They knew what to do in those circumstances. And I feel there is, in those sort of circumstances like a final, you don't have to necessarily be the most aesthetical. You might not be the most pleasing on the eye, but you get the result done. And I think sometimes that's what matters for fans, is that them winning, for example. So sometimes there has to be a balance. And I think even the best sides, if you refer to Real Madrid, for example, last season in Champions League, Carlo, I think the best scene you have is him smoking his cigarette on the sidelines, even when they're losing 1-0, because he knows, he's confident that they will get another goal. Benzema and Modric, they seem to just pull out something and they were incredible. So I think there's different levels. I think there's always that cockiness, there's that confidence, everything plays a part. But I think, I don't have any issue with a team playing it long. You might not agree with it, but ultimately, if it wins you games, who's to argue? I think this is the thing, especially if you imagine the likes of Udinese, for example. I think they've done amazingly with Sutil, for example, this season. Maybe they played it too much, perhaps. But even Italiano, I think he struggled with Fiorentina at the beginning part of the season. They've gone to a bit more pragmatic. They're not necessarily the free-flowing side, but they are playing to their strengths and they're winning games now. So this is the funny thing about that. So I suppose for me, it's just more, I feel like at that lower level, there's not that kind of cusp of players that are coming through. They're not necessarily coming through. And then there's also that debate about Serie B and Serie A. There seems to be a level of players that do really well at Serie B, but never are bothered about making it into Serie A because they'll get offered more money or they're comfortable at their clubs in Serie B. So it's like, why would you aspire to be in Serie A? Serie A is the place to be, right? But, there's some structural issues there as well. I feel like, they should try and overcome it. But
it's true. If you look at the level of Serie B as well, it's true. I mean, probably, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, it was much more, I wouldn't say competitive, but level of players there. If you look at the Classifica Marcadore, the top strikers, you could see completely different names from now, and you would say, oh, wonderful. But then, I was attending Como v Parma a couple of weekends ago, and Fabregas and Buffon were in midfield, and you say, well, what's happening, And but then again, there are old players at the end of their careers,
exactly,
trying to find a good way out of the game, kind of, or a way to stay in the game in another fashion. So it is not what Serie B should be. Perhaps I get your point. It should be like a step up to Serie A.
And Serie B is a tough league. It's a tough league. You see how many teams that go down and then almost get relegated to Serie C. It's incredible. The levels down there is incredible.
They don't come back.
They don't. They really do struggle. But let us move on because we had a few games this week and it was Coppa Italia time. So we had the first legs of the semi-finals. Interesting two sets of games, it's fair to say, Federico. We had Juventus take on Inter in the classic Derby d'Italia, and then we also had Cremonese take on Fiorentina. But I think all of the highlights and all of the news was made around the Juventus Inter game, which obviously is probably nice for you because you actually, with Lazio, take on Juventus this weekend. So it's interesting. But obviously that game finished 1-1. Didn't come to light until the 82nd minute when Cuadrado scored initially for Juventus and then Inter get the penalty just before it finished, and Lukaku takes the penalty and dispatches really well, despite the crowds and what they were giving to Lukaku. And that obviously made the headlines itself because of the chanting that was going on. I suppose what really resonates with me is you're seeing these videos inside that Allianz Arena, and it's not just like a couple fans, it is quite a number of fans. And I suppose big question is what are the authorities doing about it? Because it doesn't feel like they're being, harsh enough. They're not being, strategic with what they're trying to do right now. And it's not the first time it's happened, right? It's not just at Juventus, it's happened at numerous grounds. And it's that reputation, unfortunately, of the Curvas that really do kind of dominate these kind of matches. But in this particular match, it was kind of really quite prominent. What was your initial thoughts on what you saw in this game?
Okay, I wasn't aware of the racial abuse until quite later on when I was crawling on the Twitter feed, because from the TV footage, it was not really evident in that moment. So when I was watching it, I won't lie to you, I was kind of enjoying the
the game,
all the fuzz at the end, let's say, especially because I would say the game lit up at the very end, so it was probably a bit boring to watch before then, and then suddenly lit up with the Cuadrado's goal and then with the penalty, and then all the cows which hands should at the very end. I was saying, oh, really? Okay. Because I remember, okay, I must say, I was an Inter employee, okay, for 4 years. I can say that freely because, I won't be an employee again. So I'll talk to you. And I remember during lockdown when they were playing the derby against AC, remember the famous Ibrahimovic versus Lukaku
Yes,
incident.
yeah.
And it was incredible because I was there. I was one of the lucky few to be in the stadium that day because obviously it was closed behind closed doors and everything, and you could literally hear everything which was going on, and it was just between the players, so there was no crowd. And we had like during that season we were doing like special editions of the podcast, and what we thought, it was like, okay, there's no crowd, we can probably do like voices from the pitch,
Yeah.
and cut like an edit or whatever, and it would look cool. And then it was fantastic because that season was like lots of Inter fans were listening to that kind of stuff because it was the only proper stadium experience you can actually get in that condition behind closed doors. I'm telling you this because in that circumstance, it was like taking a gas, like saying, "Oh, what's going on?" It's it's noticeable. You notice what's going on, and it's it will make the headlines.
Yeah,
for
of
sure.
course. Yeah.
So that's what I thought when I was watching Juve Inter in that moment. It was like, yeah, this is gonna make the news. But then obviously I didn't expect it to go back again to the usual stuff, which is a pity, obviously. But at the same time, I always mention another example. I in 2001, I attended a game in Scotland, Tynecastle, Hearts v Rangers, and I remember local fans booing a Rangers fan, black Rangers fan, like with a proper unfortunate monkey chance. And I was like, all right, I was expecting to make the headlines following days on every paper, and I was looking at every paper, and there was nothing there. I said, wait a minute, what's wrong with that? Why they're not saying anything? Because it was a completely different approach to what I was used to back home.
Yeah.
And I was saying, all right, maybe they're actually getting it right, because if in Italy, if you do all the fuss and everything, then people will feel like, oh, we're famous, they're talking about us because we're racially insulting Lukaku. But whereas in Scotland it was like the other way around. It was like literally nothing there. So there was nothing to talk about. And then they probably didn't do it again, or they're probably not doing in 2023. I wouldn't expect the crowd at Tynecastle to behave like that. So it was just it just vanished. It just vanished. So sometimes I wonder, is that the right approach? I'm happy to be in this podcast, which is called Anglo-Italian podcast, because also you probably heard from De Laurentiis. He keeps talking about this infamous Margaret Thatcher law, which doesn't really exist. It never really existed. What existed was completely different project. I think it was the Taylor report, which happened, in the 1980s. And actually, what the report was saying, it was not like put these guys in prison. It was like, all right, guys, we need to renew your infrastructure. So seating areas, do this, do that, invest some money, in football, in proper football. Because in that moment in England in the 1980s, it was like taboo. People told me you couldn't even go for an interview in a job and say you were a football fan, that people would look at you like weirdly. I say, really? Is he? So I think England v Romania was not even broadcasted live because people, I don't know if it was England v Romania, some other, maybe Ukraine, I can't remember, but it was not even broadcast on BBC because there was no enough interest. If you think about it today, it was like, really?
Yeah, exactly.
So it was just because they needed to put interest back in football matters, and that's exactly what they did. But that was a long road. You can't really sort it out in one day. You need, like, as you say, you need like a proper strategy, do things properly, but especially invest wisely, and that's exactly what English clubs have done since then, to be honest. It's 1980s.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of the match itself, if we bring it back to the game itself, big result for Inzaghi, because I think there's a lot of heat on him, especially given it's 10
Too
now
much.
defeats in the league, and then obviously going into this match, he needed to get something big out of this. I think he'll take it, but obviously he's going to miss Lukaku in the second leg by the look of things as it currently stands anyway. But for Juventus, obviously they rested quite a lot of players in the previous game match. Coming into this, obviously you would have thought that there would be the team that had the momentum potentially. But certainly this makes a different dynamic going into the second leg, which will be in 2 weeks' time. I mean, do you anticipate there to be kind of something that Inzaghi can get out of this? Because Inzaghi seems to be like a cup coach. He seems to do it in the cups, but not so much in the league. So do you think it's all the momentum now goes towards Inter after this result?
First and foremost, let me say I feel really sorry for Inzaghi because I attended the Inter v Lecce game, and it was like when the lineups are announced, and then the guy there, the speaker actually says the name of the player, and then all the crowd responds with the last name of the player or of the coach. And then there was actually no one screaming Inzaghi, literally almost no one inside the San Siro with 60,000+ fans. And I know from other other Inter fans, they don't really value him as a coach, which is a shame because I know obviously what he did for Lazio, and I feel sorry because he doesn't deserve that kind of treatment. But at the same time, I realize, I understand expectations at Inter are different. You won't save a season by just winning a Super Cup, even if it beat AC quite roundly, I would say. But that won't save the season. Obviously, big chance to move forward in the Champions League as well. Inter had not played in the last stage of the Champions League for how long? 11 years,
Exactly,
11, 12 years. So he deserves credit for that. But as you say, when they lost momentum in the league and they lost too many games, it's just doesn't make sense for Inter in this season. But as you say, that last minute penalty would definitely change the dynamics for the return fixture. Even though it seems like Inter always suffer a bit against Juve in every game, be it for a refereeing decision, for another wrong, or for whatever. It's really difficult. And then, if you ask me from a neutral perspective, I would have loved it to be the Vialli final in Rome, but it won't really happen. It would have been wonderful to be Juventus v Cremonese, but it won't happen. So if Fiorentina will go to the final, then if it doesn't change much now in terms of romantic approach towards this game.
Yeah, this is true. I was going to ask you, in terms of Inzaghi, do you see him still being in a job by the end of the season?
I would like, I would love to, because at the same time, if I think about it, who are the other options? I personally remember when I was traveling with the club, and we went to Madrid to play Atletico, and then Lautaro scored the winner in a friendly. I had the chance to meet Simeone in a restaurant, and I think he would be really eager to be next Inter coach. But at the same time, do you really see that happening? Because it's very tough. If you consider his salary at Atletico, what he has built at Atletico, leaving without a Champions League, which was definitely was his dream. They're losing 2 finals against Real Madrid. I don't know if his job is really done, but if you see how Atletico have been playing recently, you would think, all right, he probably needs to change. If he changes and then moves to another club, that club will definitely be Inter, in my view. But I don't know if it's probably too soon at the minute, because club-wise as well, Inter are kind of assessing themselves as well. You don't really see a proper future until another president maybe comes in. So it's a bit tough. Then I know many Inter fans will probably dream of the Walter Zenga appointment, but at the same time, that will be just because he's an Inter fan. Is that because of him as a coach? I don't know. It should be both ways. I don't really see any other proper option, to be honest. So what do they do? What do they do? Just get rid of Inzaghi and bring in a kind of,
I think this is a problem. I mean, we were talking about it on our podcast, and you think the options you've got out there, I think they're really struggling to get a coach. I mean, there's no way they're going to get Conte. I can't see De Zerbi leaving Brighton for them, for example. And then
Mourinho coming back.
I can't see that either,
I can't see
unless he's
that
got
either.
money.
No.
This is the problem. He wants some money to invest in that squad. It's not like the Inter side where they could treble that season, for example. So I can't see that happening. And then you kind of look at the options in Serie A now. Juric maybe could come in from Torino and do a good job, but then you're kind of looking at, well, he hasn't done so much apart from Torino, for example. And then the ones that are coming through, they're probably not ready to kind of step up. So, for example, Italiano, I think he's got a good philosophy, but he's not ready just yet. For example, Sutil's kind of new, for example. I don't really see many other coaches really being able to do it. I did suggest maybe Marco Rossi from Hungary, for example, coming back. But that, again, he's probably at that age where he prefers to retire now. He probably isn't in that stage.
The point with Inter as well, I mean, if you see, obviously, history, you know well, when you have like a stricter coach, then they can succeed. Otherwise, it just won't work for multiple reasons. It was like Inzaghi last season, it was working because, it was giving more freedom to players, but then giving more freedom to players this season has translated into kind of anarchy, let's say, which is not really what you want at Inter to be successful. They don't need that. So you definitely need a stricter approach, like obviously Conte, Mourinho, that kind of coach. So but I don't see that happening apart from maybe Simeone, but too soon.
Too soon, perhaps too soon.
And then when they invested like in other people like De Boer, it never really worked.
There's rumours of Sergio Conceição again from Porto, but
it will make sense. Will Stankovic make sense? Maybe. Kivu was doing well in the under-19 with the Primavera. I think he's been working all his way up through the youth ranks.
Exactly.
Which it will make sense. He knows the players inside out. Probably Kivu will make sense. Club legend.
Igor Tudor, who's been doing quite well at Marseille. I appreciate he's one of those, you either love him or you hate him.
Too much Juve. Just can happen, I don't see that. Yeah.
Well, I'll quickly mention Cremonese. Obviously, they lost their leg against Fiorentina, making it a bit more difficult going into the second leg. Fiorentina been doing quite well. Have you been impressed by how Italiano has been kind of, I suppose, this second part of the season, really getting them back up?
No, I really expected Fiorentina to keep performing well, despite they had like some bad performances at the very start, like losing to Lazio 4-0 or losing in Turkey against Istanbul BB 3-0. But then they recovered perfectly. But then I was kind of confident it was going to happen because I remember the Spezia side from Italiano was really very good side, the way they played. I think he likes positional football, but that's not the kind of positional football of players not running. They run into position, they know what they're doing. So I knew they were going to play well. And I remember when Inzaghi's Lazio were playing Spezia, they won games, but they never deserved to win because, Spezia played much better than them. So I was confident that Italiano, he was getting a better side. They would perform after a certain point, after buying into his philosophy, which they did, and it was wonderful. Actually, before Sarri came in, I think Lotito had like a 4-hour conversation with Italiano in order to see if he was good enough for the Lazio job, but then he decided not to. But I think it would have been good addition for Lazio as well, in that case. So, as I said, I think obviously it's very, very good chances for them to win this, to end this 22-year draft, and they can do it either with the Coppa Italia, with the Conference League. They're very, very, very good position to do it.
Definitely. Well, we'll quickly now do a weekend preview because I'm conscious of time. So tomorrow, Federico,
and they play Spezia next weekend.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
His former club. So interesting game.
Should be interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll start off with tomorrow's matches, and we've got Salernitana taking on Inter, Lecce versus Napoli, and Milan taking on Empoli. Just word on Napoli, because obviously we saw that shock defeat on Sunday against Milan, and that was some comprehensive win for Milan as well. It was the Milan that we saw from last season just performing on that day, and Napoli having rarely seeing such a poor kind of team performance, because it wasn't just one individual, it's a whole team performance. Obviously kind of easy match against Lecce, but it's never going to be an easy match when you go to Lecce, because it's all the way down the south on that farmer's pitch, right? But yeah, do you think they'll go back to winning ways this weekend?
Well, they need to, although I've listened to Spalletti's press conference. He said he will bring some changes. So we will have to see, because the Champions League games next week are so important. That's why obviously in a normal weekend you would expect them all three to win these games tomorrow. But I'm not so sure exactly because of that, because of what's coming up next. In Napoli, I think they consider the Milan game like summer storm, something which it happens and then it goes. We'll have to see if that kind of dented their confidence. It hasn't affected their ambition for sure, but what about the confidence? What about the self-esteem? Because if you lose 1-0 is something. If you lose 4-0, it's a completely different matter. So does he actually act like a sense of revenge when they actually play Milan next midweek in the Champions League? And obviously that's the risk of tomorrow, is overlooking this, the league's fixture to move directly into the Champions League. But there is just too much expectation in the city at the moment that they can't really afford to underestimate the game tomorrow. Even if, as you say, as you were mentioning, Lecce had some decent scopes, I think, during the season. They also played very well against Inter at the very start, and then they beat Lazio 2-1. So, it's not an easy place to go.
Definitely not.
But
they've been playing really well. I've been impressed by Lecce this season, and players like Basharito, for example, I've been really impressed by him, even though he's a typical homeboy by the sounds of it, but he's loving it. And you know what, I'd love for him to be in one of those bigger sides, but it doesn't feel like he'll be one of those players to do that, unfortunately. But
probably Napoli to win by 1 goal margin, it will make sense.
Yeah. Well, we'll move into Saturday's games. Quite a lot of games taking place. I'll go through the fixture list. So it's Udinese taking on Monza. Then we have Fiorentina taking on Spezia, Atalanta taking on Bologna, Sampdoria versus Cremonese. We've got Hellas Verona versus Sassuolo, Torino versus Roma, and then your beloved Lazio, Federico, taking on Juventus. We might as well take that game on first. How are you feeling going into this weekend? I mean, there must be a lot going on, little battles, it feels like, especially for Sarri. You will want to get one over Juventus in particular. But it's going to be an interesting matchup, right?
Yeah, as you were mentioning, hopefully the Coppa Italia game will have, will leave some, we would say in Italian, scoria, so some bad taste,
wounds,
to the Juve team, because Lazio, they don't have cup games anymore, unfortunately. So it's at least they could prepare for this weekend's game much better. But then I also remember the reverse fixture in Turin, which Juve won 3-0, and it was a dead rubber in the first 45 minutes. And then Juve, they found this goal out of nothing, and then they just literally, had it very easy in the second half. Too easy, I think it was just too easy in the second half. And they were missing players. If you remember that moment of the season, mid-November, because of the World Cup break, it was like the feeling was like you were sinking. Allegri was on the verge of leaving, so I don't know whatever happened with Agnelli, Nedved, all that kind of stuff, which seemed to be destabilizing the all the atmosphere around Juve. But still, in that game, okay, the ultras, which normally make the headlines for other reasons, but in that case, they came back to the Allianz Stadium because they had not been supporting the team for quite a few years, and they actually returned for that game, and that actually boosted the atmosphere inside the ground as well, which I think made it also the difference for Juve somehow. And I think Lazio just shrunk completely in that game, and then they just headed into the World Cup break in a miserable form, to be honest. That's why when they started again in January, the loss that Lecce drew against Empoli, they're still not right in the head. And so the point is, when Lazio play Juve, they don't really have a good tradition against them. Probably most Italian clubs don't. But at the same time, Lazio have just won twice at home against Juve in the league in the last 20 years, which doesn't make sense to me at all. But that's, exactly the kind of game when we expect them to step up a notch and say, okay, prove to the league that we're actually there and we are for real, because otherwise, it won't be wasted. I don't say it's wasted, but at the same time, you need to prove your credentials, and that's a very important test for next season. Then obviously, those kind of games in the past, Lazio have just failed miserably, like losing 1-0 at home, which seems to be like a favorite result of Allegri this season. So I wouldn't really draw off a 1-0 Juve win on Saturday night. But then obviously, hopefully, I'm proved I've proved wrong.
Well, definitely. I think your form going into this is really good. Last 5, you've been unbeaten. So that's always promising when you compare that to a Juventus, where they have had 1 loss in the last 5 as well. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting. Contrasting styles, Allegri, Bull versus Sarri. I think Sarri will wise up. I think he'll understand where the kind of little pockets of opportunity are, especially with Juventus. I think down the wings in particular, if you can expose them, put a lot more pressure. I feel, when you look at how Lazio approached Napoli, if they can do something very similar against Juventus, I think they can overpower them, certainly with the personnel that they've got. So I'll be definitely rooting on Lazio this weekend, that's for sure. Don't worry, you've got an extra Lazio fan in me. The other game that I want to also kind of highlight, because this could be the opportunity as well, Torino, hopefully maybe doing you guys a favour against Roma as well. Yeah, did you expect maybe Juric to pull off a shock against Roma?
Why not? But at the same time, I don't know. Just Roma probably we definitely need to do better moving into the Europa League game as well. So I think this is probably a good opportunity for them. But at the same time, I think Torino last home game they lost 4-0 against Napoli, so they probably they would be beware of Roma. So I probably see a draw in this game because they're both very, very tough teams to beat when they are on their day, let's say. So I don't see Roma really losing this one again. I always hope to, of course, but if I have to be objective, then I don't really see them losing this time because especially they have also those 4 players back after suspension, and then they kind of struggle against Samp until the 50th minute. Then obviously Samp were reduced to 10 men, so it was pretty easy until the end. But then they don't really score the second until the very end. So
exactly,
it's going to be a tough game as well for them.
We'll see. And last game I'm just going to call out is Atalanta versus Bologna. The reason I'm calling this out is Bologna under Thiago Motta have been very impressive. Like, they've been pulling off some consistent runs and interesting squad as well. Do you expect maybe, Bologna not traditionally kind of looks upon as being the side to kind of really push on into that type of maybe top 7, top 6 mix? But, the way the league is going and there's a good few games still to go, do you expect them to maybe push on and maybe to push Atalanta here in this game?
I actually forgot about Thiago Motta as a candidate for the Inter bench.
Exactly, yeah.
Because I was talking as well to a friend the other day. I was saying, I would only want probably Thiago Motta, but then again, it would be Thiago Motta, Kivu, Stankovic, maybe Cambiasso one day. Who knows? They're all the treble winners, the club legends. Which in this moment in time for Inter, it would definitely make sense. And Thiago Motta, when he first came into Serie A, it was like, how does this guy actually play? It was like, it seemed like a PSG at the youth level. It was like playing 2-7-1, which is like, really? So it was just too stupid to think about. Obviously, he has adapted his style to the league, but he's doing really well. And I'm happy for what Bologna has done under him. So it's true, that could be a key game for them to obviously show up credentials for Europe, for Europe next season, which will make sense for what they did this season. It would definitely make sense. So it's a big game. It surprised me that you haven't mentioned the Sampdoria v Cremonese, which is another 6-pointer, of course. But
it's
then
a
obviously
huge 6-pointer.
Yeah.
It's a huge 6-pointer. But I kind of feel with Sampdoria,
they're still going down. You probably think
you're still going down. You're still going down. Unfortunately, even Cremonese, it's good if they could get a win, for example, because they haven't played bad. Like, they've just been unlucky. This is the problem. They've probably been one of the most unluckiest sides to probably be relegated because they've not played poorly, like some previous clubs when they've been relegated. They've been really poor, like Sampdoria.
And if you think in the cup, obviously they won at Napoli, they won at Roma. And then, you would think, all right, they're probably going to beat Fiorentina, which they haven't.
Yeah.
But then, they had a very good cup run as well. So it means, they had the chance to beat the big guns. If they had the chance to beat the big guns, it means they proved themselves they could be at that level. But then it hasn't been enough so far.
You never know. If they could just win the Coppa Italia, that would be
it would have been a great season.
It would be like the Wigan of Italy, where they win the cup but get relegated. So, hey, Federico.
And we haven't talked about the Coppa Italia formula, which is terrible. That's another problem of Italian football.
Yes, we regularly highlight on our show about how they play matches at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. because no one cares about those tournaments. It's incredible. But Federico, thank you very much for being part of the show. We'll be delighted if we could have you again in future. I'm sure we'll try and arrange that. But for the benefit of those listening and viewing, how can they catch up with your work?
Yeah, probably just follow me on Twitter, which I'm sure you have done. So I think it will be good. I can't give you the Instagram account because I've been locked out recently, which is a shame. Okay. I don't know how to access Instagram anymore. So it's Twitter is the only one left.
Well, grazie, Federico. Good luck for this weekend, and we'll speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Phil Brown, and you're listening to the Anglo-Italian podcast.
And before we leave you, don't forget there is some Premier League action. So I won't bore you and go through the whole analysis of what has been taking place this week. But let me remind you of the fixtures that do take place this weekend. So we'll start off with Saturday. So at 12:30 p.m, we have Manchester United taking on Everton. Then at 3 p.m, we have got Aston Villa taking on Nottingham Forest, Brentford taking on Newcastle, Fulham taking on West Ham, Leicester City taking on Bournemouth, Spurs taking on Brighton, Wolves taking on Chelsea, and then the 7:30 or 5:30 p.m. kickoff is Southampton taking on Man City. And then the big games that do take place on Easter Sunday are Leeds United taking on Crystal Palace before we see the big game at 4:30 p.m. and that is Liverpool taking on Rory's beloved Arsenal. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy those games over this weekend period. But as I sign out, make sure you do your dues and follow us on our social accounts. So make sure you follow us on Twitter at Italian Anglo Podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram as well as Twitch and all the other socials at Anglo-Italian Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe to this video. Have a great Easter, whatever you're up to, and normal service will resume on Thursday. For now, ciao, ciao, and have a great time.